Why is the way that breweries describe their beer so very important to not just drinkers, but staff, sales, everyone?
So really the whole idea is, in some instances, if people are at a tap room or at a bar and the beers are on draft, great, you have the opportunity to try before you buy. But not all beers have that ability, right? Especially if it's packaged. So what we need to do is give the best description possible for that consumer of what that beer is actually going to taste like. Because we know everyone's got limited resources, right? Limited money to go around to treat themselves to their favorite beers. So people are going to want to make sure that they are spending money on something that tastes the way they expect, and that's going to be a taste that they like. Now, not everyone knows why they like what they like, so teams can be trained to help people. So if we have better flavor language, we can share that with consumers to really make sure we're describing the products in a way that makes sense to the consumer and that helps them understand why they like what they like, so they keep coming back for more. So it's really us playing this important role as a bit of a translator to make sure the customer gets value, they're getting what they want, and they keep coming back.
Love that idea of playing the translator. I think that's really key. And it leads me on to asking, where do you see breweries getting it wrong so often? Like a lot of breweries I've worked with, maybe they just target the beer geeks and they assume they know what they're talking about. But where do you see the problems in the pit holes?
Yeah, so really what I see most is people tend to be on one side of the equation. They're only talking about the ingredients and processes that they're using. They're not translating that to the consumer, what that means in the glass. So what do I mean by this? At WSET, we have an approach and we use it across all of our streams, whether you're learning wine, spirits, beer, sake. We call it the DNA of WSET education. So if you think about a DNA strand, you think about that double helix, right? So we have one strand, and that's going to be focused all about product knowledge. So that's going to tell you what malts I've used, what hops I've used, what yeast I've used in beer. Then we have the other strand, which is how does that present in the glass? What color do I see? What aromas do I detect? What tastes do I find? Our job as educators, and when you come and train with us, is to connect the two, to make that link so you have an understanding. What most people are doing in the world of beer is only talking about the product knowledge and assuming their customer knows how that's going to present in the glass, when really the customers need to be talked to on the other side. Because we don't need to know anything about beer to use our tasting skills, right? If you put a glass in front of someone and you say, what color is that? Well, if it's a gold colored beer, maybe they'll say light or pale or gold or yellow, something like that. But we all have eyes. Great. They didn't need to be trained to say that color. Ask them to sniff it. Well, many of us are familiar with, say, banana, orange, clove, if we eat different fruits, spend a bit of time baking, like making curries. So we can use our culinary experience or experience with everyday eating. Most of us eat and drink at least 3 times a day. So we can then use our aroma memories to find what aromas are in the glass. And then you say, have a sip, and many people can detect, ooh, there's quite a warming sensation with that. So what's in the glass can be detected by anybody with no beer knowledge. What we want to do then is make that connection for the customer to say, that Belgian triple that you have there was, yes, made with base malts. That's why it's golden color. Has aromas of banana, orange, and clove because we used an Abbey ale yeast. And we had a really high original extract prior to fermentation. That's how we were able to make a lot of alcohol, and that's how we were able to have this warming sensation. They don't need to know that to enjoy the product, but what most people are doing is giving a list of malt, hops, yeast used, and not what that's going to mean for the drinker in the glass. So we really want to be able to make that connection, bridge that gap. And then if you have an interested consumer that says, oh my gosh, I like that warming sensation, how do I get more of that? They then know, you want a higher alcohol beer. So it's about enabling people, excuse me, to go back and forth from those 2 different strands and have that understanding piece. So we're going to focus on how we make those connections for people to really give people that ability and that confidence to do it for their customers.
Love it. And I've seen it time and time again. You always, you don't always see, but maybe on a bottle or a can, people will opt for going the hops included in a beer versus the flavor that you can expect.
Aromas from those hops, exactly.
So you talk about aromas, you talk about flavor. You mentioned banana a minute ago, but grapefruit, chamomile, biscuit, minty. Is that a little bit subjective for some people? Is there a way that people need to know this is what biscuity is? This is what orange or banana is?
this is where I think a lot of people get hung up. So I'm going to take one step back and talk about taste more broadly. Because, of course, we named this session, What Does It Taste Like? Say it like they'll taste it. So we often talk about flavor in the context of taste. And the word taste really frustrates me because it's very limited. Now, the horse is out of the gate. We're never going to get to change that language, but we're not just talking about taste when it comes to building flavor descriptors for our customers. So taste, just to get some definitions out there for us all to be on the same page, is only one piece of the flavor puzzle. We have 5 basic tastes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, or savory. That's it. They're detected on the tongue. And for most beers, it's sweet or bitter that we're looking at, whether they are in balance or it's more bitter or more sweet, or if our sour beer is sweet or sour. When we talk about all the things that you just mentioned, ooh, this one smells a bit like chamomile or toast or chocolate or coffee or banana, those aren't tastes, those are aromas. Now, we can detect aroma in 2 different ways. We can detect aroma just when we're breathing in, so we bring a glass to our nose, and that's what most people think of as our sense of smell, just when we're holding the glass and sniffing. Where the confusion comes from is we can also pick up aroma when we have a sip. So when we have liquid in our mouth, those aroma molecules travel to the back of the mouth and then into the nasal cavity that way. So we're also picking up aroma on the palate. And this approach is called retronasal breathing, so it's going in reverse, versus orthonasal breathing, when we're breathing in through the nose. So we often think when the liquid is in our mouth, that's all taste. But technically, if we're getting specific, taste is just those 5 things, and everything else is then aroma. And then there's one last piece of the flavor puzzle, again, when the liquid's in our mouth: texture. Is it creamy? Is there that warming sensation? Is there this prickliness on the palate from the carbonation? So when we're thinking about describing taste for our customers, we're really thinking about describing flavor. And the way to do that comprehensively is to think about what the aromas are, what the tastes are, and what the texture is. And that gives us so much more to play with to communicate to a consumer what is in that glass. Now, when it comes to actually learning those aromas, right, you're saying, do we really need to have experience with chamomile to find chamomile? Yes. So we can't detect aromas unless we have experienced them ourselves. A really helpful way to learn what aromas might be possible in beer, I'm going to share one tool. I've got a few for you, but this one is called the Lexicon, and this is what we provide at WSET. It's a free resource. It's available on wsetglobal.com. You can look at level 2 beer under the qualifications tab and find this. But this is basically a bank of words to choose from, broken down by aromas that could come from malt, aromas that could come from our hops, and aromas that could come from our yeast. And this is showing us what we might find in beer, and therefore what we need to be familiar with if we want to be better tasters. So a really fun way to get better at tasting is to have some chamomile tea, is to buy a grapefruit and to tell the different aromas between the juice in the flesh or the pith, or treat yourself to some chocolate or a nice cup of coffee. If we want to find the possible aromas in beer, we have to have memories of them first.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. But, so we've got these 3 elements then of taste. You talk about the aroma, the texture, and what's in the mouth and what's going on. Do you feel that all 3 of those need to be presented to a drinker for them to get, guide their choice on it? Or is there more of a dominant one than the other 2?
So I think aromas are the most helpful, and then thinking about tastes and textures can come in support. So I think we have so many different ways that we can communicate to consumers, right? It's helpful for the teams to know as much as possible about aroma, taste, texture, and how that got in the glass. So what was the hop choice or the malt choice? Or when did we add our hops to make this beer so bitter? So the team should have access to all of that information, but what we share with consumers will filter down and kind of segment what's most important for that style based on how much space we have or the time we have for that conversation.
Okay. So then you say about like sitting down with a cup of chamomile tea, treat yourself to chocolate, coffee. Where do you see that kind of dictation of what the flavor profile is coming from? Because you're going to have front of house staff, you're going to have brewers, you're going to have many other people in a team who might be pulling different things from it. But to my opinion, you need a North Star to go, right, no, this is what we're telling people it tastes like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a really interesting point. It comes back to what you were saying earlier about like, is taste subjective? So a lot of people struggle with this because they think, well, I can't tell anybody else what they're tasting, right? We all taste differently. And there is some truth to that. But on the flip side, there is some truth to the fact that our choices of certain malts, certain hops, certain yeast will introduce specific compounds. So if I'm using a highly kilned malt because I want a lovely amber color in my beer, that's going to introduce some melanoidin compounds that won't be present in my base malt. If I am using American hops, they're going to have different essential oils inside compared to British hops. If I'm using a Belgian ale yeast, I'm going to get certain esters and phenols being produced that a lager yeast won't make. So there are some objective compounds that are going to be present that we can use as hallmarks, shall we say, for certain beer styles, but what can differ is how people interpret them. So I'm going to share a little paragraph from a book because I think it's a really interesting way to get us into this discussion of subjective versus objective aromas. So a friend of mine, Mandy Naglich, has written a great book called How to Taste. So if you're curious to learn more about this topic, it really goes into the science. But what I want to highlight is just a tiny snippet about one particular compound, as I was talking about, whether it's those melanoidins or those essential oils or certain esters and phenols. They may be there, but how we interpret their presence is what can vary. So here's an interesting one. It says, lived experience influence our perception of flavor compounds, but your brain cannot change the chemistry of the food that's in your mouth. Anethol, the compound responsible for licorice flavor, is either there or it's not. Whether you describe that anethol as black licorice candy, fresh fennel, crushed aniseed, or absinthe depends on the encounters that you've had with it in the past and how your brain has filed away and organized those memories. But you can't experience anethol if it's not there. So by using our knowledge of the ingredients that we're using and the possible aroma compounds that they've introduced, that gives us a place to start, but it's how that is interpreted by different people will vary based on our own aroma memories, whether that's cultural, geographical, our sensitivities, our preferences. So this is why it's so important to taste with so many people, because compounds can be experienced and expressed in different ways. One more fun fact for you on this. There is another beer and wine educator. His name is Cicerone, and he is the art of tasting on Instagram. So he's a fellow advanced Cicerone, he has his WSET diploma, and he also has a master's in sensory science. And what he does is these amazing wine trainings, and he does beer trainings too, where he'll take a neutral wine and add in a specific compound, whether it's isoamyl acetate or geraniol, as an example. So he'll put that compound in. He knows what he's added. And he will then gather data from everyone who's trying it to understand how they are experiencing that aroma. Now, geraniol, it's in certain grapes like Muscat, but it's also in certain hops like Cascade. And the universally accepted term for the presence of geraniol is rose. But drinkers in the UK tended to detect that as Earl Grey. Drinkers in Italy tended to detect that as bergamot. Drinkers in Turkey described it as Turkish delight. So we have these different cultural contexts that will help us interpret what is present. So that really enables us to think about, what is our audience? Am I looking at a UK audience or am I looking at an export audience, and will they interpret things differently? And what different perspectives can I get from around the business to make sure I'm using a wide variety of descriptors that will speak to lots of people, no matter where they're from.
That's fascinating. So with that in mind, are you suggesting that you release a beer and you put it into the UK market using a certain set of descriptors, but then if you were to export it, you adjust the description and it potentially will be better received purely based on where it's going out in the world?
That may have a more appropriate cultural context, yes. One of the breweries that I love that is doing an incredible job with their descriptions is a brewery called Natalya. They are based in New York, but their descriptions are very specific to American candy and nostalgia and those sorts of things. So if you've not had Sweet Tarts or you've not had Jolly Rancher, you may not connect with that language. Whereas I grew up in the States, and when I think of those things, I know exactly what it's going to taste like. One of their beers they describe as a peach icy. I remember getting that from 7-Eleven. You know, it's a very specific and nostalgic memory because, of course, our sense of smell is really closely tied to our memory. So what you might need to do then is change those things that are relevant to a UK audience. So instead of talking about Jolly Rancher and green apple candies, I might be thinking about Frutella, or I might be thinking about different British candies that are available or different British references. You know, if I wanted to describe a confection, I would maybe talk about Colin the Caterpillar cake. You know, that's a very specific British reference. So it's about using things that are going to speak to your different audiences And it really does help to tap into nostalgia and memory to bring flavors to life.
See, that's an interesting one. By the way, I want to see the descriptor of someone putting Colin the Caterpillar on there.
Yeah, right. Who's going to make a pastry stout with all those different chocolate and chocolate flavors, sprinkle flavors? Yeah.
Because that's almost like the evolution of going, this is the expected, like you say, the chocolate, the coffee and things like that. But you can take it one step further in that case and go, but what products or what elements contain those that people also relate to?
Yes.
Making it more branded, I suppose, in a way, right?
Exactly. So you can then go from having this understanding of, okay, what ingredients have we used? What aromas does that typically link to? How is my team interpreting those aromas? Because maybe we have different descriptors. And then how do I put that in my brand voice? So again, going back to Natalya, the reason that they use these descriptors that are outside of their normal beer drinking context is because they were set up to bring in people from outside of the world of beer into beer. So instead of describing the beer as just saying it's going to have aromas of peach from certain hops that we're using, they're saying it's going to taste like a trolley peach ring, a specific thing that you have tried and that you have a memory of. Whether you know anything about hops or not, you know what that tastes like, and you might be curious to try a beverage that has those characteristics. So again, it's using who your audience is and what your brand voice is to go from saying something like, I wrote a little descriptor, so let me get my example for you as to how we could kind of improve our use of descriptions. So say someone starts with something like this, puts on a menu, DDH, NEPA with Citra and Mosaic. Some people think, many brewers, might use that kind of language. Many breweries might use that kind of language and think that says enough to my drinkers. If they know beer, they'll know what I'm on about. Well, many of them don't know beer, so they might not know what DDH stands for, double dry hopped, or NEPA, and that it's the same as a hazy IPA, a New England IPA. They might not know Citra and Mosaic and the expected aromas. So you're putting a lot of work on your customers to understand what you mean when you just stick with the ingredient and process language. You could easily change that into something like, we have pronounced tropical notes of citrus and mango with restrained bitterness and a smooth, creamy texture. So we're getting across the fact that we have really intense hop aromas, not so much bitterness in this one. What those hop aromas are, tropical and mango. And then we also have that smooth, creamy texture coming through from the wheat and oats. So you're translating it from what ingredients I used or what process I used to what is this going to present like? What's my main taste? What are my main aromas? What's the texture? But maybe that doesn't sound like you. Maybe your brand is really more whimsical and fun and you have this UK specific audience. What about something like this? Smooth, creamy, and tropical, like a melting Solero on a hot summer day.
Love it.
Right?
Beautiful.
So it shows that evolution of you need to know what ingredients and processes you're using. You need to make the link to what that presents like in the glass. Then you translate that into your brand voice to make it come to life for the way that you talk about your beers.
Oh, no. This is
All
amazing.
right.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking here, as a drinker, as a consumer, those are the descriptors that you want to see on a can, right? You're going to see a style, and then you're like, yeah, I know what one of those tastes like, because it conjures up this experience in your mind, and you just want to get stuck in.
Exactly. And so it's whatever language you like to use, whether you do like the more whimsy, nostalgic, or maybe you're thinking of a more adult flavor where we want to highlight, I don't know, you've got a bourbon barrel aged stout and you really want to emphasize the booziness. There's different ways that you can talk about that language. You can workshop it as a team. I know not everyone loves AI, but this is a good sounding board if you wanted to put it into something like Copilot and kind of say, how do I say this? I know these are the aromas that I'm finding. How do I say this in a more fun way? These are the opportunities where you could do that chatting with your team or get a little bit of help to really bring it to life in a way that's going to make it sound interesting and make people want to drink it and let them know what it's going to taste like, but in a way that sounds like you.
Yo, I just want to take a second out of Branding for Breweries to make you aware of something. For those of you who don't know, outside of hosting Branding for Breweries, writing the book Branding for Breweries, I also provide independent breweries with hands-on support with their branding, design, and marketing. In fact, it's even better than that because it's not just me, it's a whole bunch of awesome independent brewery folks who are dedicated to doing the very best for each and every independent brewery. The team have worked with some incredible breweries like Northern Monk, Ossett, Brains, Pillars, all over the globe, and gaining results like doubling revenue, winning Rebrand of the Year, even gaining over 7 million views on the TikTok channel. So if you're looking to level up your brewery's branding and marketing this year, drop us a message over at www.thebrandweavercollective.com and a member of the team will get back to you and we can have a chat. Now, back to the show.
And I suppose over time, it's best to kind of get some guardrails around it and just be like, okay, so this is the kind of drinker we're going for. This is the descriptors, or these are the products that we're trying to relate to as well. So from a branding perspective, there's always consistency with it.
Exactly. Yeah. And the different members of the team will look at this through a different lens, right? So if we're thinking about taproom staff, they need to know your beers inside and out, because someone might come back and say, well, last week I tried X. What do you have that's most similar? But they also may need to have the most broad perspective on beer, because anyone could come in and say, well, normally I'm a Saison drinker. If you don't have a Saison or don't know what a Saison tastes like, it's going to be much harder to find something that customer is going to like. And they may not know why they like a Saison. They've just tried one before, knew they liked it, and want something similar. So taproom staff really do need to have a very broad understanding of different beer styles, what flavors could be present, and then your beer styles in particular to compare and contrast. Your sales team, they're going to want to know their competitors. I train a lot of sales teams, and often they'll say, this is, taking over some of our tap handles. What's different about the flavors in their beer to how I talk about the flavors in my beer? And that does then track back to ingredients and process. Okay, how are they making theirs versus how are you making yours? How do you talk about it? How do you bring it to life? So trying competitor beers next to your beers and understanding the different flavors is really important there. For the brewers, if they're going to bring in new, wacky, wonderful ingredients and processes, amazing, but don't just stop there. Talk to the rest of the team. Why did you add in this certain flavor? Why did you pick this varietal of hop? Why did you add it in the whirlpool instead of adding it as a dry hop? Give them the flavor impact of those ingredient and process choices. And then for your marketing team, it's thinking about, how do I express this in a way that sounds like us? So everyone needs the same skills, product knowledge, linking it to tasting ability, having that understanding, but the way they use it in their role will vary slightly.
And of course, you touched on the marketing aspect there, which I'm a big fan of, is what I do a lot of, and the branding side of things. So where are the best places you've seen this really come to life to help a drinker understand it? Beyond the description on the front of a can, what are other good places that you can use this language?
So there are so many different ways to engage with our customers, right? And I think a lot of us just think about on pack, which is super important, but there are many different touch points. So what I like to encourage is, for each beer that a team is making, they should really make a complete description. So internal, doesn't need to be shared with everybody. It can really just be for your team. That is kind of a few sentences about appearance, aroma, taste, texture. So those things we talked about, all the key elements in the beer. And then a second short paragraph on how that got there. So we used X hop, Y malt, Z yeast. Now, if you want, you could pop that on your website on the product page. You've got lots of room there, so it can't hurt to share that information with your customers, full flavor description, and how we achieved it. Then, say you've introduced a totally new process and you want to just get really geeky about it and tell everybody. Write a blog post. You can get into a lot more detail there. Really amazing example of who does this well, Allagash. They have incredible blog posts that explain interesting techniques in a really accessible way. So that's if you want to go longer form, but we don't always have the space for that. So if we're thinking more shorter form, you know where to start from, and then you cut down. So you need to figure out what you can fit on back of pack. Okay, this is where we don't have that much room. So that is thinking about, well, what are the most important aromas in this beer? In WSET, we group beers based on whether they are malt-driven, hop-driven, or yeast-driven. So right away, we give consumers this idea of what kind of characteristics you can expect. If it's yeast-driven, I'm thinking fruit and spice. If it's hop-driven, oh my gosh, could be a whole range of tropical fruits, herbs, flowers. And if it's malt-driven, it's going to be more confectionery and baked goods. So you then hone in. Maybe you even say that language. Stout, this malt-driven stout is going to have aromas of coffee and chocolate and a restrained bitterness. Might remind you of your favorite mocha. So it's picking from what you wrote previously and then shortening it for the space that you have, or expressing that in a visual way. So I really like the spider diagrams that Brew York has on their packages. I think it's a really interesting way. It is a lot to process. It's not for every consumer. Not everyone is visual, but it kind of shows your levels of sweetness, your levels of bitterness, your levels of roast, your levels of hop character. So that's another way with very limited space to get a lot across. It could be that you need to write a single line on a menu. You know, we can't fit many words onto a menu these days. Again, it's going to be a similar approach to what you put on back of pack. What I like, I've got Telea's menu here. Again, they focus really on descriptions, but for one example, we have their Fresh Coast West Coast IPA. It says light and crisp, underripe pineapple, a little bit dank, and then it tells you brewed with Citra and Mosaic. So it's focused on the flavor descriptor with a tiny bit of product knowledge for those who might want that and might be able to do something with that information. But then we've got things that are quite different, not focusing on the hop characteristic, but they're a Vienna lager called Montana. Notes of honeycomb and whole wheat toast, brewed with 100% Montana craft malt. So we're bringing in, again, descriptors that make sense to people who may not have a beer background, and then a little highlight about the product that's unique, that you might say, Montana grows malt? What? And have that conversation and open it up. So again, it's picking and choosing based on the space that you have. It could be shelf talkers, like at Sainsbury's, right? If we're thinking about supermarkets, there's not much that we can fit on there, but it's figuring out what is the key information I need to get across, and maybe do I put a hint about beer and food pairing on there as people are in a supermarket. The Cyclops tool, which is used for a lot of cask beers that you can read on the back of the tap badge while pouring, has appearance, aroma, taste. So again, you need to have the full descriptor and the how it got there to pull from. And then, depending on typically what style of beer it is, malt-driven, hop-driven, yeast-driven, or what new things you want to emphasize about that beer, certain ingredients or processes that you used, you then draw down from there based on the limited amount of space that you have. That's my suggestion.
I know, I think that's brilliant, because like you say, you start with the big package, and then you start to draw out and tease out the small elements that suit the whatever product system, wherever it's going ultimately. Oh, I love the processes. It just makes so much sense when you talk about it. It's amazing.
I think that's it, right? People find this really intimidating. And what I want to try and get across is it can be. The reason that we find this so challenging is because scent is tied to memory, which is amazing. All of a sudden you're having your Frutella sweets from when you were a kid, or you're calling the caterpillar cake, or you're back in grandma's house smelling her perfume. What the challenge is, though, is because aromas are processed by our memory centers, they're not processed by our higher thinking centers where we process vocabulary. So we're taken somewhere. Evolutionarily, all we needed to do was know, do I like this scent? Do I move towards it? Or is that a dangerous scent? Do I run away from it? We didn't need to name it. So naming these scents is the challenging part, and it's the part that takes work. But hey, you just get to try different foods and fruits and herbs and spices and beers in order to develop those skills. So none of us who are good at this are rocket scientists. It really does just come from practice and knowing what to expose yourself to, what could be possible to find in a beer, so you have a memory of it to draw on, and you're linking that memory to that language so you can detect it in your next glass.
Does this mean that once you have this education, you're confident in the knowledge, that actually you can reverse engineer it better? Like, I want to brew a beer that tastes like, I don't know, Iron Brew or a Mars bar or something like that. Does it work the other way?
Exactly. Yep. So if you really think you're getting feedback from your customers and they're saying, oh my gosh, that Solera one was so fun, I would absolutely love something that tastes a bit more like I don't know, what's another ice lolly? I'm like, need to go to the ice cream man. So if we're thinking
Rocket
about
lolly. There you go, there's one.
a twister or something, right?
Hey.
Then you could think about, okay, well, that has pineapple flavor and lime flavor and then a bit of berry. All right, we could play with some really interesting hops that are going to give me those specific lime, lemon, and berry characteristics. Or if I really wanted it to have a color, I could add in some fruit. So it's reminiscent in terms of appearance and not just aroma. So yes, you can definitely go back and forth. And that's why having that product knowledge is the foundation. You really need to understand what aromas are possible from different malts, different hops, and different yeasts. Then you use that to inspire your recipe creation or explain what's in the glass.
Amazing. So Nat, if you were talking to a brewer and they go, yeah, fair enough, we need to up the game on the descriptions, and we can do more here. What is the first thing you're suggesting to them? That first month, what do they need to do?
How do they do it? Well, I think really the easiest thing is to get something like the lexicon. So we're working with impossible aromas that are found in beer. Again, free resource that you can get from wstglobal.com, but there are plenty of other things that are similar that just give you this bank of words to choose from. All you need to do then, go to the grocery store, buy those things, and have your team taste different fruits, different parts of the fruit, smell different herbs, try different baked goods. Once we have those aroma memories, then it's great to taste it next to your beers, and not just the ones that you think are going to be there. It's not just smelling your stout next to some coffee and confirming. It's also smelling your coffee, smelling your stout next to some caramel and saying, oh, it's actually not in this one. Because confirming the presence or the absence of those aromas is equally as helpful to then again build those memories. So having the different food items next to your beers, and also another important piece, is not just about aroma, remember, is calibrating on different tastes. So a really fun one I like to do, again, if you have this in your range, go for it, or you can buy different beers in. In our classes, I'll often start with a comparison of one yeast-driven beer, one malt-driven beer, and one hop-driven beer. So a Weiss beer, a Munich Dunkel, and an American IPA. We're getting banana and clove aromas from the Weiss beer. We're getting the toast and the chocolate aromas in the Dunkel. We're getting the pine, the resin, the citrus aromas in the IPA. We can then have different examples of fruits or foods to double check that. But also what's really important is we're getting different tastes. We're going from low bitterness to medium bitterness to high bitterness. We're also getting different textures. The creaminess in the wheat beer that's not there in the other beers, and even perhaps a bit of a lingering bitterness or astringency in our IPA. So by having these beers next to each other and having the palate calibrate to them all at once, we really are teaching ourselves how to detect these different things and how to better describe these different things. So you can DIY it, you can do it with your team really easily. I used to run sessions like this at trade shows all the time. But then having the next steps, if you are keen to take it further, WSET, of course, offers great training that we can help bring this to life, and we can use your beers and really make it relevant to you. So if anyone's curious about that, please do reach out. But I know that training is tricky, right? It is an investment. It's one that pays, but not everyone has the funds. So I have an amazing book I'm going to recommend that I think is super helpful. Mark Dredge's latest book, Beer, A Tasting Course. It is absolutely fantastic. I've got some pages marked off that I just think are really wonderful that show us possible aromas that we can find in beer, where they come from, really rich descriptions. One of them, if you really want to push the boat out, it's not just thinking about, does this smell fruity? It's citrus fruit. What type of citrus fruit? It's orange. What part of the orange? Is it the flesh? Is it the peel? How fresh is that fruit? Is it underripe? Is it overripe? Has that fruit been cooked? Is it a kind of marmalade aroma or a fresh orange juice aroma? So when you get started, oh my goodness, there's so many rabbit holes you can go down to further develop your details, but just simply smelling what's in your kitchen, going to the grocery shop, familiarizing yourself with different aromas that you can find in beer, you will start getting better really quickly.
I'm doing it this weekend. I'm
gonna sit all the time. I'm like constantly smelling cloves, smelling pepper, making sure I know the difference, know how to spot them and things. Yeah, it's just
kids walk into the kitchen and be like, what are you doing, Dad?
Yep.
No, I've really valued this. Thank you so much. And the wonderful takeaway from it is, like you say, that extension beyond understanding it, what are those core components, and then making it something that your brewery can own, I think is truly wonderful. And even your example there of like, okay, if it's citrus, it's orange, what part of the orange, how's it been cooked? It just opens up a plethora of ways that you can describe your beers that feel more ownable.
Yes.
So thank you so much.
And I think last thing I'll say, this should be fun, right? So go to the supermarket, try those different things, have an excuse to have your favorite ice lolly, remind yourself of the nostalgia flavors, because experiencing, appreciating, and better understanding flavor means that every meal, every beverage we have is going to be that little bit better. This doesn't have to just be limited to beer. And then again, every food that you try when you're out to dinner or when someone's, made you a lovely cake, all of these are new aroma memories that you're creating that could feed into your future descriptors. So don't see it as something intimidating, see it as something to have fun with. And then it's going to start feeling a lot easier. You're going to really enjoy it.
100%. It's going to be the one. I'm so excited. I genuinely am going to do this. You've been really great at shouting out a load of people and a load of resources during this chat. But what you haven't really done is told us where we can get in contact with you. And if people want to find you, have a chat, check out your book, where can they go? So how do we get in touch with you now?
Yeah, well, I always like to say, I was telling the team as I was preparing for this, I'm like, I just am that conduit for information. I'm happy to find all the resources and share them. And it's really wonderful to shout out Mandy's work and Mark's work and Cicerone's work. But yes, if you're curious and you want more references, You can find me on Instagram at cheers_with_Nat. That's also the name of my new podcast. I interview women who work in drinks about what they do and why they love it. And I also have a website, Beer with Nat, still, that kind of shows all the teaching that I've done, the talks that I speak at, and all the other ways that you can find me. And yes, my book is all about the history of beer. That's a whole nother rabbit hole we could go down, but there's so many other stories that you could link to there if you're making a historical style or you're making it in a certain way. That's called Beer, Taste the Evolution in 50 Styles. Again, very taste focused, but linking back to the stories as to why certain beers taste certain ways because of the ingredients and process that were available in certain regions. So everything links. There's always so much more we can learn and discover. And that's why I'm still here in beer all these years later and don't plan on going anywhere. There's so much to learn and enjoy.
You can't go anywhere, mate. You're far too good at this. This is brilliant. Nat, thank you so much for your time today. Everyone who's popped a comment in, I can see you. I know you're there. Everyone who's listening in the future, this is Tim talking to you from the past. You rock. Everyone stay tuned for another fantastic episode of Branding for Breweries. We've got a load of great guests just like Nat coming up soon. I'll see you on the other side. Thanks, Nat. Thanks, everyone.
That's a wrap on this week's episode of Branding for Breweries. If you got something great from it, hit follow, like, and subscribe on your favorite streaming app. Or even better, leave a review, share it with your brewery pals, or get in touch, because I want to chat to you. Rock on!